Hello and welcome to AA Gaming. Adam here, and I've got another episode of the Rhystic study for you guys. Today's going to be something a little different. It's going to be a deck tech on my mono green control deck featuring Rhonas the Indomitable. I think you guys might enjoy these episodes. These deck techs, kind of looking deeper into whatever decks you want to see that we have on the show. I know our format isn't necessarily perfect for getting a real feel for what the decks are capable of or supposed to do. It isn't perfect. With that out of the way, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the two local businesses that are supporting us, Dark Titan Enterprises and Merrymac Games and Comics. One is an online eBay store that wants to put up a site soon, and the other is a brick and mortar local store that we frequent. If you want to support us or the show in any way, please click the link below to Dark Titan Enterprises and buy a card on there. They have lots of Commander stuff in stock and plenty of other games and oddities as well. If you really want to support us, let them know that we're the ones that sent you there, or you came here because of us. And any help would be greatly appreciated. Now on to the good stuff. So what I have here for you today, and you guys should have already seen it on the show, it was in a one-on-one with Mykius the Lunarch, Andy's Mykius deck. It is my take on mono green control with Rhonas the Indomitable at the helm. Now the general idea here is, like in our preview video for the card Rhonas, we mentioned that green has never really had, or there really hasn't been anything like a 3-drop 5/5 Death Touch Indestructible that asks no questions, except to attack or block. This is an insane mana to stat ratio, and with the abundance of green draw related directly to power and or toughness, and the fact that your general has both Death Touch and Indestructible, there are a lot of strategies that can come into play here. Things like just recently, Rishkar's Expertise can draw a massive amount of cards and cast a spell for free. And it's almost always at least 5 cards for 6 mana, which is a return on investment that not even blue gets a lot of. And likewise, with the Death Touch and Indestructible, you have things like lure effects and fight effects that turn really bad green cards into board wipes and the best targeted removal in the format, besides Path and Swords. Prey upon becomes something your opponent should fear. What this all leads up to is Rhonas can single-handedly support a new archetype of green control in EDH. And from my testing, it seems to actually pan out. Hilariously enough, it works. And I'm going to be going over the handful of different categories of cards that go in the deck, and I'll be talking about a few highlights from each little category, things like drawing cards or removal, stuff like that. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's dive right in. Now, since the whole deck is based around the fact that green removal with Death Touch on board essentially becomes wipes or kills, you need some redundancy for the effect in case you can't cast Rhonas, or in case he's a forest, or in case he's just incapacitated in some way. So we need some redundancy for the effect, and we've got plenty in green that allow us to do this. Between some equipment like Basilisk Collar, Gorgon's Head, and Gorgon Flail, you have plenty of ways to give any creature you manage to put out Death Touch and allow yourself to start working off of that. Another great example is things like Bow of Nylea, which give all your attacking creatures Death Touch, which is great for the lore effects that we're going to be covering later, allowing the capability of just a full wipe depending on how much power your creature has, which luckily enough Rhonas can pump as well. And of course you need some some of the other creatures to function in the same way, entering in cards like Cockatrace, which is like the original Rhonas, green Death Touch creature, which all creatures that block or become blocked by it are immediately killed at the end of combat, regardless of whether or not you dealt damage, which is phenomenal since it also has flying. And speaking of flying Death Touch, you also have cards like Hornet Queen, that make a whole bunch of tokens, and now you can just keep going from there as much as you want. And you can really protect yourself and kill off a lot of creatures with just one Hornet Queen. Next, we have the lure effects, which go perfectly hand in hand with the previously mentioned Death Touchers. Whether single-shot effects like Shion and Life's Roar, and Roar of the Challenge and Revenge of the Hunted, so that you can just quickly get that effect on board, either with a pump or instant speed, so you can surprise your opponent and take out a whole bunch of creatures at the same time, or have them be repeatable with things like Noble Quarry or Nemesis Mask. Nemesis Mask being in particular really potent because there aren't a lot of ways to continuously allow a lure effect on board, just because of the overwhelming power of being able to do so. And last but not least, we have Predatory Rampage, which is another good example that allows you to take multiple Death Touchers you may have on board, let's say with Hornet Queen, and, well, Hornet Queen is flying, that wouldn't work very well. But let's say you've attached a Goron Given Flayer to a creature on the ground, to say, and you get to attack multiple opponents, which allow you to wipe multiple boards, which could lead to essentially just being in Garruk's Wake for 5 green mana and potentially doing a lot more damage with that. Now, let's say a lure effect isn't quite going to be effective enough. Maybe you need to get rid of an Elesh Norn before you can even begin to attack with your Rhonas or other creatures without power now, because there's an Elesh Norn board, or just other things that need to die immediately or need to be picked off without much of a hassle. You have fighting effects, which there are a plethora of in green, and a lot of them are really, really good once you always have a Death Touch Indestructible on board. Also under this category is, I put Thornbite Staff under this category. We'll start with that. This card is insane. We're not even like going infinite with it with Kiki Jiki. We don't even have a pinger by itself. Like, even without the Goblin Sharpshooter, everything dies on board effect, still being able to pay 2 whenever you want to kill any creature is enough to make sure there's almost really no chance for creature decks to get off the ground. I've kept an entire board on lockout, just having 22 mana, a Thornbite Staff in my general. Everything died, and there was no way anyone could keep it on board, even the Sliver player. Polukranos is another good example of a fight creature. He allows himself to spread out his fight damage, allowing you to kill multiple creatures without much of a hassle. They'll probably end up murdering him, but he's taking out at least 5 or 6 guys with him. And heaven help your opponent if you can give Polukranos Indestructible before doing so, and allowing himself to keep the counters. Other effects, we have just the easy one-shots like Nature's Way, which gives Vigilance and Trample as well, which can help a lot. Prey Upon, and Predatory Urge. And then we have Unval Tracker, which is a repeatable effect, like a little bit like Thornbite Staff, but works well with the general, since fighting back isn't really a drawback. And even though it doesn't work very well because you can't give the Beast Death Touch, Izuri's Predation is just a phenomenal card for fighting in general. So there isn't a lot of synergy, but this card is nuts, killing everything on board and perhaps giving you some beasts in the end. Now that we covered how our control deck is going to keep pretty much every creature off the board forever, you need a way to recharge after you've expended those resources. A lot of these are 1-for-1s or one-shot effects. So even if they are massive card advantage through 3 for wanting, 4 for wanting, 5 for wanting your opponent, in terms of what you kill for what you spent, you're still going to have to replace those cards somehow, or your opponent's just going to out steam you. So luckily, with our general being a 5/5, like I mentioned before, and just the overall largeness of some of the creatures in the deck, all of these draw equal to power effects that green has become insane. The best of it being Garruk Primal Hunter, who can just enter the battlefield for 5 when you cast him and just immediately kill himself to just draw upwards to at least 5 cards almost every time. Otherwise, you can just leave him there to create beasts and then draw cards later, or use them as a win con. Other effects like that are Rishkar's Expertise, which is great, Soul's Majesty, and Fruit of the First Tree. Also Primal, or Momentous Fall is also great. Another card I love in this deck, and I just love in general, which I'm so glad I found a way to use it, is Hunter's Prowess. Until end of turn, target creature gets +3/+3, trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw that many cards. I don't have to explain by why itself this card could draw an immense amount of cards with your general or with another big creature, but also just the synergy with having Death Touch in your deck and giving this creature trample and +3/+3 allows you to kill whatever you trample over and then draw that many cards past how many creatures blocked. Because the synergy with Death Touch and Trample is that you only need to do 1 damage and then the rest tramples over. So it really becomes how many creatures do they want to throw in the way, and that's how many less cards you draw off of it. So I love Hunter's Prowess. You have staple green draw, like Harmonize and Sylvan Library. These don't necessarily have a lot of synergy, but they draw a massive amount of cards, an almost unfair amount. With a Basilisk Caller out and Sylvan Library, you can just pay the 8 every turn, which I found myself doing. Even if you aren't necessarily gaining all the life back, paying 3 life a turn for 2 extra cards is Phyrexian Arena levels of dumb. And last but not least, a great one with the lore effects is Infiltration Lens, which triggers for every creature you block. It says whenever equipped creature becomes blocked by a creature, you may draw 2 cards. So with the lore effect on, it's however many creatures your opponent has, you draw that many times 2. So it's an insane effect, and it costs very, very, very little to play and equip. And even if you're just swinging with Rhonas, it's really not like they can keep taking 5 from him. So you can just start drawing multiple cards if they try and chump. And whatever they chump with is dead. And some players just don't have a lot of small creatures to throw in the way. Now, there's going to be some stuff that we just can't kill with either combat or punching the shit out of it. So we're going to need removal for artifacts, enchantments, and the like. Starting with, I've got Whirlwind up here. Whirlwind, like I said, not necessarily an artifact or enchantment, but being able to do with all flying creatures at once for 4 mana is great. Even though we've got a few flying creatures in the deck, it really isn't. It really is just like killing way more things than we should be able to in green, and for a pretty cheap price too. Especially considering that no matter how good your deck is at killing flyers, flyers can still be one of the things that kills you the quickest in mono green. For artifacts and enchantments, and especially enchantments, we have Calming Verse and Tatiana's Song. Both of these are incredible at getting rid of huge amounts of these card types at once. Calming Verse can blow up all enchantments you don't control as long as you tap out. And Tatiana's Song essentially just animates all non-creature artifacts into creatures and makes them lose all their abilities. Everybody's equipment, everybody's mana rocks, all this stuff just turns into little creatures, which then, hilariously enough, you can murder with a swing with a lure, like, just throw lure on Rhonas and just get rid of all their artifacts at once, do all the damage to their swords and shit. It's hysterical. If you want to get rid of artifacts and enchantments otherwise, I suggest stuff like Stomp and Howl is a great card. Seal of Primordial is great. Beast Within is also on here. Depending on your meta, you may want to throw more or less of these in. But in a pretty creature heavy meta, just having a few silver bullets for those strategies or those card types is never a bad idea. Now this is EDH, right? And we're in mono green, so we're going to need to get a lot of mana. And boy howdy do we play a lot of mana ramp cards in this deck. We've got 10 of them here. The highlights being Magus of the Library. Magus of the Library is a criminally underplayed card in EDH, I believe. For just 2 green mana, you get mana ramp, colorless mana ramp, and you also get the ability to have Library of Alexandria at all times. And I can't tell you how many games I've had with both this in Maelstrom Wanderer and in this deck, where I've just drawn something like 3 to 5 cards off of this dude alone. And for an investment of 2 mana, that's insane. It's really not as hard to play around 7 cards as you think, especially with the massive amount of card draw that this deck is capable of. You can pretty much always keep yourself at 7 and just keep tapping and going. It really is just gas. Another criminally underplayed card, there's a theme here, I think, is Frontier Siege. Not necessarily for that second half. That second half is basically worthless. The dragon side. Having your flying creatures fight when they enter the battlefield is only really useful if you're going to abuse Hornet Queen, which is actually not that hard to do in this deck with regrowth effects, but still seems like a stretch. Most of the time we're going to use it for the 2 green mana at the beginning of each of your main phases. So at your pre-combat main phase and your post-combat main phase, you're getting an extra 2 green mana. Now it doesn't ramp it all at once, but even just like 4 mana for 2 ramp, especially even in the same turn. If you play this on your pre-combat main phase, you're going to get 2 mana on your post during the same turn you cast it. It's phenomenal. There's just so many ways to use this mana split up instead of all at once that makes the card beautiful. I love it. Everyone should be playing it if they're playing green. It's just a great card. We have things like Exploration and Gaia's Touch, because we're going to be drawing a lot of cards. We're going to be playing a lot of extra lands. Very capable of doing that. And Gaia's Touch is one of those lesser known ways to do it. In this deck, it essentially is Exploration for like $1. And you can also sack it to add 2 green mana if you really need to, which is nice for things like leaving open 1 mana and a Beast Within, or tapping out and holding open Thornbite Staff in case you need to, and just kind of catching your opponent off guard is great. Another card I think is phenomenal in mono green is Overgrowth. You just enchant the land and you add extra mana. Same with Wild Growth is another great example of that. Now of course we've got the more staple stuff, though a lot of it's mono green shifted. Skyshroud Claim gets only Forest. Same with Nisa's Pilgrimage. Whisper of the Wilds is a great card that allows you to ramp for a lot of mana because you will get Ferocious really quickly with your general. And obviously every deck plays Soul Ring. Why would you not play it? So that's what we got for ramp. And then we're in green, so we get a few tutors and a few regrowth effects. I kind of mix these up together, especially since I actually don't play a lot of tutors in this deck, just because I tend to keep them light in EDH in general, though you could always add more. There are plenty of decent ones you could play, though they're not as good as you would expect in this deck. A lot of the creatures are kind of are kind of not the main reason you're playing the deck. Like in most green decks in EDH, you're getting really good creatures out of it, but it doesn't seem as necessary here. So we actually went higher up on regrowth effects than tutors. But for some of the tutors, we have Treefolk Harbinger, which is a great card for grabbing a forest if you need it, just fixing your next draw, or grabbing one of the two Treefolk, which double as win cons in this deck. They get really really huge because they're both equal to the number of forests. So you need this card to make sure you can either get your win con or your next draw for land. Mulavani Beast Tracker, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, is great for getting just about any creature in this deck. Almost everything has either Death Touch, Trample, Vigilance, or Reach. Or no, it's not Vigilance. It's Reach or Hexproof. So you can get almost anything, and if the Tuck rule still exists, you can get your General too, which is great. But that hasn't been a thing for a while. But if it comes back, that's definitely a solid thing. And then for regrowth effects, we've got some cool cards here. One of my favorites being Woodland Guidance, which is an incredibly unknown clash card from Lorwyn, in which you return any card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you clash with an opponent, which means you're essentially just battling off the top of the library to see who gets the highest confirmed mana cost. And if you get it, you untap all your forests, which is insane. Then you remove it from the game, obviously. But that card's phenomenal. I love it. And another good example is Nissa Vital Force, which can be used for a lot of different reasons, a lot of different ways. Most of all being definitely the just getting any permanent back is just great, and then you just kind of go from there. Or you hit the emblem and you draw an insane amount of cards for every land you play. Though this deck doesn't necessarily focus on playing land drops, so for the most part, I put it under the regrowth effects. Another key thing I learned about the deck is that Nissa animating a land is just about the only real way, as the list stands, to deal with pro-green. As you saw in the Mykius versus Rhonas game that me and Andy had, if a creature has pro-green, this deck does kind of fall apart really quickly. Luckily, there really aren't a lot that have it, but running into a Mirran Crusader was a bad time. So you got to make sure you get that Vital Force, animate a land, equip a Gorgon's Flail to it, and then attack with it. Attack with it with a lore, kill it, get rid of that Mirran Crusader. My God. Other than that, obviously, Regrowth, Wildest Dreams, I love, and Seasons Past is another good option, though I prefer Wildest Dreams. And that's what we got for those. And last but not least, we got some of the good stuff here. Just stuff that didn't really fall into any of these other categories, but mostly serve as win cons. Nylea is amazing in this deck. For once, giving all your creatures trample is actually really important because you have Death Touch, which I mentioned before just has an insane synergy of essentially allowing all your damage to go through. Creatures blocking only mean one damage is prevented. So for the most part, your creatures are almost unblockable, or at least all blocks are so just feel so bad. It's all bad combat math for your opponent at that point. And the fact that she's indestructible and sits around with Rhonas, if you can have them both active at the same time, it's great. It's a great time. He can give her trample, she can give him trample. It's great. Other than that, Dungrove Elder is one of my favorite cards in the deck, without a doubt. Just a hexproof, equal to forests, huge tree folk. The hexproof is what really does it, since you can load it up with a Rancor, you can load it up with, which is one of the cards that falls in this category, the good stuff. Rancor, every green deck should play it. Your cereal is better with Rancor, you can put it on everything. But throwing all that stuff, throwing a Death Touch to Rancor, a lure effect, and just going to town with a Dungrove Elder is hysterical. And last but not least, another one of my favorite cards is Colonian Twingrove, which just creates two Dungrove Elders, except they don't have hexproof. So even if your opponent does have the removal spell for it, there's still another potentially like 20/20 just sitting there. You give him Trample with Rhonas, and you're really going to take huge chunks out of your opponent that you have no business doing. That's also why we run so many regrowth effects, because Twingrove is great if you just keep bringing it back and getting another Tree Folk and bringing back getting another Tree Folk. They're essentially just left with having to kill the token every time and not the actual creature. Also, I put here a Skin Shifter. Skin Shifter is a really weird card, but I love the fact that you can pay 1 green mana to turn him into a 4/4 Rhino, which turns on Rhonas. So he made the cut, and he's great as well. So, now that you've gone this far, I hope maybe I've piqued your interest and convinced you that mono green control can actually work and really be played with a straight face, though you won't have a straight face while playing it. That brings us to just about a close of this deck tech of Rhonas the Indomitable and mono green control. I hope you guys really like this video. I put a lot of work into it. I put together a lot of new stuff for it to make it happen, and I think I've got an idea for this kind of video and how I like it. I think I like it how I did it, and now I should be able to make them a lot quicker. So if you guys like them, please let me know. If you even mildly enjoyed this video, leave a little feedback so I can figure out whether or not this is the route we take for I don't want to use filler episodes, but I keep thinking that word because of just that's what TV series do. But it's really not filler. I put a lot of work into them. It's not just, a cop out, but it is something that can kind of go in between if, our personal lives get too caught up. I mean, we are just humble YouTubers. So sometimes stuff comes up and, this isn't exactly our number one priority, which is, we've got girlfriends, lives, full-time jobs, and he's going to have multiple full-time jobs. So, if this would be an acceptable, fill-in for a normal video, please let me know, and I'll keep doing, some of the other decks you guys liked on our show. I'll talk about anything for 20 minutes. Any one of my decks for 20 minutes. That's easy. I love it. So, yeah, leave some feedback and go check out Dark Titan Enterprises. Buy something if you want to support us, and we'll catch you next time.